Hi, my name is Gunter Ainsworth, and I'm going to talk about facing fears. There was a quote made famous by Franklin Roosevelt that goes, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." And while he was using it in reference to convincing American citizens to not be afraid to spend money in a down economy, I think the quote actually touches on a slightly deeper subject that I'm going to discuss here today. The first thing I'd like to discuss is distinguishing between fear and phobia. A fear is very simple. It is just it's kind of described as a quick jump or jolt to our adrenaline system. It'll get your blood flowing a little bit, but it's not really that bad. A good example is if someone is just sitting around and they see a spider crawling on their leg. They get a quick jump, maybe their heart rate flutters a little bit, but they just brush it off and it's not that big a deal. A phobia, on the other hand, is much more severe. It's described as a persistent, lasting fear that causes severe impairment in a person's life. And while something may start out as simply a fear, it can quickly spread to a phobia if it's not kept in check and controlled. And there are many things in life that obviously we are afraid of. Everyone has fear. Anyone who says otherwise is probably afraid to admit that they have fear, which is kind of ironic. But fear can be healthy as well. It is not all bad, and being afraid of things can keep you safe and be healthy for you as long as it's controlled. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. The first thing I'd like to get into is why fear is considered so restrictive and is a hindrance to life if left unchecked. Fear in everyday life, if it is allowed to control you, it can be very detrimental to your relationships, both socially and personally and professionally. It will keep us from going to talk to the cute girl or cute guy that we see over there, and it will prevent us from taking risk at work or being willing to go talk to our boss about an idea that we have and which could better the company and end up improving your status throughout the entire company. It could prevent us from taking an experience that could better ourselves or opening ourselves to new adventures and ideas and new experiences. These are all things that, if fear is not properly controlled, can end up preventing us from even experiencing, which would basically control our lives. And another thing that we have to be aware of is that fear can start out small, but if it's left uncontrolled and unchecked, it can very much spread to the rest of your life, to all facets of your life. A good example is if someone is very outdoorsy, likes to run, hike, bike, rafting, all that outdoor stuff, they could run into a snake and have a close encounter, so to speak, with a snake on a trail one day. Well, that person, if they let go of their fear and just let it run rampant throughout their lives, the next time they go running or biking, all they'll be thinking about is the snake and how they're afraid of where it might be now and where every snake in the forest is. And instead of enjoying their outdoor hobby or whatever they're doing, all they're focused on is that fear. And then it can continue to spread to where every time they're even outside their house, all they're thinking about is the snakes and where they might be and if they're going to see one and what might happen if they do. So all they're focused on is the fear instead of living life and enjoying it. So in that sense, fear can spread very quickly and become a phobia, and once it becomes a phobia, it becomes even more difficult to treat. So in that sense, fear has to be controlled. Now, with all that being said, a life without fear, while it may seem very glamorous, and I'm sure Hollywood has made it seem great in some ways, but a life without fear is not all it's cracked up to be. And first I'd like to talk about how a life without fear, can be a good thing. It can allow us to take all the chances that we're afraid to do. It can allow us to go talk to that person that we're unsure about talking to. It can allow us to take those chances at work. It can allow us to express every idea that we're afraid to say normally. It can allow us to take chances with new experiences like skydiving or water skiing for people who are afraid of water, or anything, mountain climbing for those who are afraid of heights. So life without fear, it would allow us to pursue new endeavors and adventures, and there would be no limit to how far we could pursue our relationships, both all socially, personally, and professionally. So a person who is afraid to take their ideas to the boss, all of a sudden, without fear, they take every idea they have, and some may be good, some may be bad, but either way, they're doing everything they can. So in those aspects, it could be very beneficial to not have fear. However, life without fear could also be very detrimental. Fear is what keeps us from running that red light because we're afraid to get hit. Being afraid to walk down a dark alley at night because we don't want to get mugged. Or being afraid to speak our mind all the time because we're at work and we don't want to get fired because we need to pay bills. And when you're out if you're outdoorsy like I personally am, and you're out running or exploring the woods, you see a bear, your obviously fear is going to tell you to go the other way because it's a bear. You don't want to mess with a bear because they're big and they have claws and teeth and things. So that fear will keep you alive in that aspect. And at the same time, fear keeps us from doing things that we know we can't do. For example, we don't want to walk out of the window of a 10-story building because fear tells us that we would probably die, and that's not something we want to do. And that's the same idea when it comes to running on a red light. We don't want to run the red light because we don't want to get hit by another car and potentially end up very badly wounded. So in that aspect, fear is extremely helpful in our lives. It keeps us healthy. It helps us to explore life without taking too big of risks. So these risks that are dangerous to us, this fear actually keeps us from doing it. But the thing is, fear has to be controlled. And there are many methods to control fear, and if your fears can be controlled and allowed to exist but not unchecked, then it's very easy to live a very fulfilling life. Some of the ways that people use to control fear are breathing exercises, which is very popular. Another popular method is called progressive exposure treatment, and essentially what it is that people take, they discuss what their fear is. It's usually done with a therapist mainly, and it's usually used for phobias, but it can be used for fears in smaller situations. And what it is people are progressively exposed to varying amounts of whatever it is they're afraid of until they are able to tolerate it and cope with it and not be afraid of it. Another thing people use is humor, which is very popular. Whatever people are afraid of, they make it funny to themselves in some way so that they're not able to better manage it whenever the time comes. Some people choose to just face their fears head on and jump head first into it and tackle it that way. Some people choose to use baby steps and just kind of ease themselves into it, which kind of goes along with the whole progressive exposure treatment. Some people use a pros-cons sheet where they will write out the pros and cons of being afraid of something and what their worst fear is, and if the pros outweigh the cons, then they're able to conquer that fear. Another important one is educating yourself about your fear. If you're afraid of spiders, then it's best to learn about some spiders, learn what kind of spiders are poisonous, which ones aren't, how you can protect your home against spiders, or that can apply to animals or insects or people, or if you're moving to a new city and you're afraid, you can educate yourself about what parts of the city are good and bad, and you can learn the roads. So there are things like that that actually help alleviate people's fears, and these are all techniques that are used. These are just some of the most popular ones. There are many others out there. And these are just ways to control fear, because fear that is left unchecked can spread throughout your life, and it can be very detrimental to your relationships. Socially, professionally, personally, they can all suffer if your fear is left uncontrolled. And that just kind of goes back to the thesis statement that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. It is not the fears of these objects or events or places or people that make it so horrible. It's the fear itself. We are afraid of what may happen. It's the worst case scenario. We picture this worst case scenario of what could happen and how horrible it would be. But it's that fear that ends up controlling us. So we have to learn to control it and deal with it and manage it on our own. And once a fear becomes controlling and turns into a phobia, it is extremely detrimental. It takes, there are some cases where people spend their entire lives in therapy trying to overcome a phobia of something that started out so small. So fear can be healthy, however, it does obviously keep us alive and help us to adjust throughout our lives and make better decisions and better ourselves, but it must be controlled. So that's about it. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Thank you.